Hello, viewers. Today again, we are honored that Larry Johnson, one of the uh, best geopolitical analysts in the world today, is adorning our show once again, and we are going to kind of discuss all over the world, the political events happening around all over the world, including the geopolitical events in Syria, Middle East, Russia and Ukraine, and then finally the terrorist attacks, which has now taken place just before the Trump's presidency in the US. So, without further ado, welcome to you, Larry Johnson.
Thank you. Yeah, good to know nothing's going on in the world, right? All's calm.
So, Larry, I think I would like to start with Middle East first because this is closer to us. What do you make of the first few weeks of Al Jalani's takeover of Syria? How are the things panning around?
Well, he's clearly not acting in the interest of the people of Syria. He is an outsider, and HTS is comprised largely of outsiders, foreign fighters. So they don't have the connections with the local tribal leaders, the local clans. They don't know the people in the land. So their ability to control, I think, is going to be in question, and they're going to get some pushback. The transformation of Jelani is just shocking, stunning, because he was not some armchair warrior claiming to be a vicarious jihadi. I mean, he was a senior leader within ISIS. And then the reason he split off and they formed al-Nusra, I'm not sure the exact motivations, but it was not a rupture because al-Nusra continued to have cordial relations with what remained of the leadership of ISIS. And then he moves away from al-Nusra and creates Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And, that first appears in the State Department Bureau of Counterterrorism country reports on terrorism in January of 2017. And from January 2017, HTS is, it's listed as one of the top 10 most active groups in the world for carrying out terrorist attacks. And so we go from that to all of a sudden, the guy's dressed up in a suit, got a shaved beard, talking, there's a show, we had a show here in the United States that I'm sure you're not familiar with. It was called Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. And what this was, it had four homosexual men who were, one was a fabulous dresser and one was a fabulous chef. And, and they'd go in and find some heterosexual guy who was a complete slob, couldn't cook, couldn't dress, couldn't clean his house, had, and they'd clean him up. And by the end, the guy was, very well dressed and talking. That's Jelani. Jelani's had this homosexual makeover, is the only way I can describe it. And it has exposed the fact that Western intelligence, despite claiming that we're fighting a war on terrorism against Islamic extremism, is in fact having relations with Islamic extremists and using them to accomplish U.S. and British goals. So what you have going on right now in Syria is Jelani pretending to be in control, but they don't even have, HTS is not a large enough entity to control the territory. Turkey's trying to figure out what it's going to do. It's, its war with the Kurds is heating up today in the last 24 hours. So you've got American-backed Kurdish forces fighting Turkish-backed Islamic forces. Yeah, that's going to end well. Then to the south, you got Israel controlling, around the Golan Heights and some key waterways. But the rest of Syria is really not under anybody's control. So we've got a recipe for chaos here.
Larry, so do you see any elements of Syrian native resistance, basically kind of putting up a show of resistance against this HTS, these mostly militants based on by foreign elements? Do you see any resistance on the ground, or do you think the people are right now in a kind of just gauging the situation?
No, there is resistance. It just depends on the area of the country. So there's, Syria is not a monolith, but in terms of ethnic makeup, you've got the Druze more towards the southwest. You've got pockets where the Alawites are strong, pockets where Christians are strong, pockets where the Shia are strong. But 70% of the country is still Sunni Muslim. But even within those Sunnis, they're not one solid block. They tend to have more tribal loyalty. So it's a mess. Syria is not an entity right now. It's got a figurehead. Jelani's a figurehead. That's all he is. He doesn't command an army. He's a useful idiot for the West.
Larry, one thing that amazes me, when I look at the 100 years history of Syria, because Syria was made up in 1928, it was carved up out of the Ottoman Empire. And now kind of France, all these Western powers have handed over Syria back to the new Ottoman Empire, which is Erdogan. It just amazes me.
Yeah, this this fulfills Erdogan's dream. He wanted to sort of recapture that glory. But this is like this is something akin to you getting all of a sudden, let's say your brother or your cousin dies, and he's got 5 kids, and they're not good kids. They're sort of out of control. All of a sudden now he dies, they come to live with you. All of a sudden, you've got 5 additional mouths to feed. They're doing things that you can't necessarily control. It creates problems for you. That's what has happened to Turkey with this. Yeah, it occupies some of the territory. And but recall when Assad, in the immediate hours when Assad disappeared, everybody said, "Oh boy, this is a major defeat for Russia. This is a major defeat for Iran. Boy, Iran and Russia, they got their rear ends kicked." And so what's happened? Both Turkey and Jelani are going to the Russians. "Hey, please stay. Don't go away. Yeah, here, stay." And the Russians are going, "I don't know. We'll see." Iran, again, it is the thing I think a lot of folks don't appreciate is that when Iran had its official presence in Syria and was working with Assad's government and working with Assad's intelligence and military, the Israelis, through their intelligence service, had penetrated the Syrian intelligence service and the Syrian military. So therefore, Israel practically knew everything that Iran was going to be doing. It had excellent intelligence on that front. Now, Iran doesn't go through that official Syrian channels. Iran, I guarantee you, still has relations and networks in Syria that are not penetrated by the Israelis. So, in a sense, Israel has ended up blinding itself somewhat to what Iran's real capabilities are with respect to resupplying Hezbollah. So this is, the dream, the Ottoman dream of recapturing Jerusalem and restoring the Ottoman Empire, because again, they had control of it for 600 years almost, I think it's overreaching by Erdogan.
That is just last question about Middle East before we move on to other topics. this conduit that we last talked about, the Syrian conduit from Iran to resistance movement in Lebanon. Do you think that they are feeling the heat of this regime change in Syria? I mean, I'm talking about the Lebanese resistance specifically. Or do you think that this Hezbollah is standing tall still?
No, well, I think Hezbollah is not the sign of a terrorist, let's say a terrorist group, an armed group, a resistance group that's insecure is when they're always out talking about what they're doing. Hezbollah is not like that. So Hezbollah is remaining quiet, and I am sure they are rebuilding networks, rebuilding supply lines, and they're making plans to, renew the fight with Israel. Israel has broken the ceasefire repeatedly, and all attention right now is focused on Lebanon and the election of a president. The favorite reportedly is this General Aoun, who, as I understand, is a Maronite Christian, but he appears to have sort of the blessing of Hezbollah as well as the blessing of the United States. So we'll see how that turns out. Lebanon is, as a government, in terms of being able to control Hezbollah, very, very weak. It is not in that position at all. What the West wants is to get a strong leader, which has a strong military that can take on Hezbollah. But I don't see that as likely. And I think that this war is going to reignite. Appears a lot are waiting to see what for the inauguration of Donald Trump. What happens then? Because Trump is sending, he's sending mixed signals. That's sort of consistent with what he's done all along. You've seen just in the last 24 hours at his press conference in Mar-a-Lago yesterday, he said that if Hamas doesn't release the hostages by the time he's sworn in, there'll be hell to pay. Well, I don't see how much more hellish it could get for the civilians in Gaza and the Palestinian people. But then on his Truth Social platform, he retweeted an article, commentary by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, in which he referred to Netanyahu as a despicable son of a bitch or something. It's just some, pretty harsh language. So the fact that Trump's retweeting that is seen as, hey, he doesn't support Netanyahu. So, we don't really know what's going on. But within this, Lebanon, it's a pawn. It's a piece in a power game, and unfortunately, it doesn't have a lot of power. It's just it's a tool or an instrument in the hands of some pretty bad people.
Larry, moving on to New Orleans, this attack that happened, this terrorist attack, I would say. What do you make of it? I mean, reading out from outside newspapers, there's a lot of haze around this whole event. Can you just lay out, what is currently available, the facts which are available as far as this New Orleans terrorist attack is concerned? Who was the person who kind of blew himself up?
So he was. I don't recall if he was born in the United States, but he came to the United States. He grew up in the United States. Shamsuddin Jabbar. He had a 10-year career in the U.S. Army, active duty, but his responsibilities. He was what they call a human resources person, somebody that handled, hey, your enlistment's up, you need to re-enlist, or you're going to move, here's the paper. He handled paperwork. And then he also moved into what they called IT. So, working on computers, programming, that kind of thing. Zero experience with explosives. Very, very, very limited experience in handling firearms. He did a short term in the reserve, and then he gets out. Now, there have been different stories circulating. Some claim that he became radicalized while in the military and that the military didn't address it. Others said that this is a recent phenomena. What is so puzzling is that he prepared in this as part of this attack. He did a lot of surveillance and preparation, and he supposedly wasn't a wealthy guy. Didn't have a lot of money. Was getting by paycheck to paycheck. At least those were the media reports, and yet he was able to buy pretty expensive computer gear and a pair of what they call meta glasses. These glasses that have a computer in them. Those were like $2,000 for just a pair of glasses. So it raises the question: where was he getting his money? Where was this income coming from? Then he built 2 improvised explosive devices that were going to be set off remotely. Now that's sophisticated. He did not have the training and background for that. Who taught him that? Where did he learn that? Did he have an accomplice? That's what we don't know. The whole tie into ISIS, he claimed that he had become an adherent, and he had an ISIS flag, except he didn't know how to read Arabic.
Yeah.
So he had the flag tied upside down, and it wasn't, he didn't even know it. So you always have to wonder what there's a narrative being built in the United States. And the narrative is this: that Joe Biden, by virtue of not controlling the borders, has allowed thousands of ISIS fighters to gather their sleeper cells in the United States, and they're just waiting for the moment to rise up and strike back. And that message is being pushed out by some former CIA, other people I didn't know at the agency, but who are also worked for the CIA as I did. But they're putting that message out. And when I see them putting that out in conjunction with what happened in New Orleans, given sort of what I call the anomalies, it raises questions that there may be some broader nefarious purpose to all of this, trying to create conditions to gin up a terrorist threat that will then allow the government to exercise more control and take away people's civil rights.
So Larry, let's just move on to the next battle line of this conflict, which is raging on in Russia and Ukraine. I think it's the most important conflict in the world. If you look at the balance of power. So what is the current status of this conflict, Larry? What do you make of it? Where is this conflict currently standing?
Ukraine is losing, and losing badly. And with each passing day, it is suffering higher casualties, people killed and wounded. And the Russians, by contrast, are moving rapidly to the west. They're capturing key towns, defense positions. I anticipate that maybe even within 2 to 3 weeks, the Russians will have broken through most of the major last remaining defensive lines for the Ukrainians, which means that Russia will be able to easily move to the Dnieper River, which is really forms sort of a natural boundary separating Ukraine and Russia.
So, Larry, as you just discussed, that Ukraine is losing right now, but what is the end game of this conflict? Because I don't think that West and Ukraine both will kind of throw up their arms and surrender. So, do you think Russia will move cross this river barrier that you talk about, or what will happen? Because as I understand, when you crosses this river, I think Russian speaking this people of Russian origin decreases, and the Ukrainian nationality or the Ukrainian or people from Ukrainian nationality actually increases. So I think it would be a kind of a can of worms for Putin to go and cross the Dnipro River. So what do you think about it? How the end game would work out?
Yeah, so let's look at it from Russia's standpoint. Their goal is to demilitarize and denazify. Now, what does that mean? To demilitarize Ukraine means they're going to push the Ukraine. They're going to destroy the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army will be destroyed one way or another. It will either willingly surrender or it will be beaten in the field. It's getting beaten in the field right now. The Ukraine has no system or process in place for sustaining the army. And what I mean by that is if you're going into war, you go with the army that you currently have, but then you immediately start drafting replacements and putting those replacements into basic training and into a training cycle where they'll spend 18 months in training, and then they are in a position where they can be brought in as replacements. Well, Ukraine hasn't done that. So they don't have a reserve of trained troops just ready to be put into battle. Instead, they're left with frantic efforts to scramble on the streets, to grab people out of cafes, out of their place of work, off buses, and then take them, put a uniform on them, maybe give them just some very, very basic training for 2 to 3 weeks, and then they're thrust into the front line of the battle, and they're completely unprepared to operate, and then they end up getting killed or wounded pretty quickly. So Ukraine has not put in place a system for replacing its losses. And without that, then with every passing day with the losses growing, Ukraine's, it's like somebody who's been cut and they're bleeding out. If you don't stop the bleeding, at some point they're going to die. At some point here, the Ukrainian army is going to die. It's bleeding out. That's the equivalent. The other thing Russia wants is to eliminate Ukraine's relationship with NATO and NATO countries, that they stop supplying weapons, that they stop supplying, doing military exercises. One thing that this whole conflict has exposed is the weakness of the United States and NATO, the United Kingdom and Germany in particular. They don't have ample supplies of various weapons systems. In fact, in some cases, they've completely depleted them. The attack of missiles, for example, the United States stopped producing those, and they don't have any more. They've given virtually everything they have to Ukraine or Israel, and they're gone. No more. And there's a replacement supposed to be in the works, but that is, to my knowledge, isn't actually being manufactured yet. So there's talk that Trump's going to come in and give the Russians an ultimatum, and if they don't do it, he's going to keep funding Ukraine. Go ahead. Send everything you got to Ukraine. Who's going to use it? That's the point. Ukraine doesn't have a cadre of trained personnel that can take those weapons and use them. This is all about personnel, trained personnel. And then the second element on it is logistics. And we've got Ukraine's got problems on both the personnel and logistics side. And the West has got a serious logistics problem, both in terms of being able to produce these weapons in such quantity that they could even make a difference if there were trained personnel to use them. So Russia's got the leverage right now. Ukraine doesn't, and the West certainly doesn't. The only thing the West could do is threaten to insert its own military forces into the action, and all that's going to do is get a bunch of Westerners killed. They're already dying. There's a large number of mercenaries that have been killed and captured and wounded.
So, Larry, let's say it's a kind of one one scenario. Let's say most of the Ukrainian army is defeated in the eastern region, right? And Russia basically reaches the kind of the eastern shores or eastern bank of the Dnipro River. What will happen, because the Ukrainian rump state on the west would still be there? And do you think like they will start a kind of a counterinsurgency, just what happened in Afghanistan, or do you think like, because I don't see this Western Ukrainian half kind of surrendering, because they, whatever you want to say, they have kind of showed up a good fight in the Eastern Ukraine.
No, no. Well, I think number one, the notion that they're going to form a guerrilla war and fight an insurgency against the Russians. One, the Russians have proven to be very effective in fighting counterinsurgencies and guerrilla wars, as they demonstrated in Chechnya. Took them 10 years, but they did it, and not only quelled and destroyed that insurgency, but in the process created an Islamic army that's loyal to Russia, and some of the most ferocious fighters in the world. Aludin, is one of the leaders. Apti is, I guess, his first name. The number of immigrants, people fleeing Eastern Ukraine, is significant. They're going into other countries, and then you add in that Poland, Romania, and Hungary each have ethnic populations inside that eastern part of Ukraine where they'll try to exert influence. So I could actually see a situation in which once Russia defeats the Ukrainian military, Russia working with Romania and Hungary at a minimum, conceivably Romania. Poland will be more difficult, but can actually come up with an international body to try to, rebuild or restore something, a viable Ukraine. Now, Russia, this gets to the denazification process. Russia is not going to allow the existing government in Ukraine to maintain itself as status quo. They're going to change the constitution. They're going to look for a change in the constitution and a prohibition on these neo-Nazis from ever being able to participate in government. That'll create some problems, but Russia will be the victor here, just as Russia was the victor in Berlin in May of 1945. I believe Russia is going to be the victor here and be able to dictate terms.
So, Larry, just last question about this Russian conflict and the Ukrainian conflict. What do you make of this Kursk salient? Because as I understand that the Ukrainian army was facing defeat or is facing defeat in eastern Ukraine. How did they end up muster, significant forces to actually occupy parts of Russia, or is this just delusional stuff from Ukrainian military?
It's delusional. They stripped forces from key units in the Donbass, in Donetsk primarily, Luhansk to a lesser extent, and shifted them north, and then launched that offensive into that attack into Kursk in August. They did it. I think they had a couple of objectives. One objective was to get control of the nuclear power plant in the Kursk region. They failed to do that. The other was the assumption that in taking this action, they would force Russia to strip its forces in the Donbass and move them north. But Russia had ample reserves, and they kept rolling. So this really backfired, because as those forces moved up into Kursk, the Russian offensive in the Donbass accelerated, and so now they're on the verge of they're enveloping Pokrovsk, Chazov Yar, and Toretsk, two key defensive hubs, are all poised to fall, and may fall and be captured within the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. That is, there's nothing that Ukraine can do to recover from those losses. This is, this is akin to what happened in World War II, as the Soviet army then began moving to the west and swept the Germans, Wehrmacht, out of Ukraine, and then was sweeping them out of Romania, sweeping them out of Hungary, sweeping them out of Poland, and ultimately had them surrounded in Berlin. The Ukrainians are fighting, and I don't at all want to disparage the Ukrainian bravery. There are still many brave soldiers on the Ukrainian side, but the logistics are against them. The numbers are against them, and Russia clearly has the advantage.